Okay, well, we're talking about End of Days, the season one finale of this extremely up and down, mostly down show for me.
It's make or break time, and I'm just gonna go on a wild guess, just gonna go out on a limb and say that for you it was mostly break.
Well, I will say, before you think I'm just gonna hate on it, I don't really have any problems with it that much, besides it just being a kind of mediocre, average Torchwood episode until the end. That's when
Now,
it just goes off the wall for me.
before we even get into anything, I feel bad because I just realized we didn't even give like a plot synopsis for the last one. So just like
I'll add this
speeding.
up. I'll add this in front of it.
Okay, so and now for End of Days, the rift is wide open now. It's causing a bunch of historical like figures, a bunch of people from different parts of history to just randomly show up in modern day Cardiff. It's causing a whole lot of trouble. So like Roman warriors will show up and get arrested, and I don't know. The first thing at End of Days is that I feel like this is a case where Chibnall pulls a Moffat, where he begins an episode with a premise. This premise could be its entirely own episode, and it's not really what this episode ends up being about. And I would have, like, now I feel bad that we maybe can't do that premise anymore. It's almost exactly, The Wedding of River Song, where that story opens with this really cool montage of just look at all of history happening at once, and isn't it weird and bizarre? And it's like, okay, give me a whole episode set here instead of what we do with that episode, where we spend most of it in a bunch of like cordoned off rooms where you don't really get to see the effects of that all that much. Where here it's like we have this great scene where Jack and Gwen go to the police station, and the one guy is like, this dude just popped up out of nowhere from like a different time period. Does he even have civil rights? Like, how do we treat him? What do we do with this guy? Give me a whole episode of that. Give me a whole episode of like our modern like sociological systems trying to deal with these complete like temporal outsiders, and like, okay, these people are here now. What do we do with this? But
Well, we
that's really kind of the first part of this episode. Bunch of people from a bunch of different time periods. And like that's
yeah.
a little bit different. The 50s to now, things were different, but for the most part, they can effectively survive in the modern day. Like they've got to be caught up with some elements of culture and pop culture and stuff, but you could see like all three of those people, if they choose to, becoming like functioning members of society within like a couple of months. And importantly, in that episode, we don't do the thing where it's like they feel out of place with the time period and that's why they like end up going or doing off whatever they do. The guy John doesn't kill himself because he can't like adjust to the time period. He kills himself because his family is all gone. Diane doesn't leave because she can't adjust to the time period. She just leaves because she doesn't like being tied down. So that isn't so much the issue there. But
Mm.
here it's like people who predate like the invention of democracy. Like, what are they gonna do here?
They have a lot to learn. It's probably going to take years of rehabilitation.
Yeah, so I don't know. I would have liked to see that story, like dealing with that and like government response to that stuff, but that's not ultimately where we end up going with it. What we do spend a little bit of time on, which I appreciate because it ties into like character motivation and stuff. The moment where this like really gets real for Owen,
Yeah.
hospital that's got everything quarantined, and Owen is like, "Oh my God, I've brought back the Black Plague." It's like, and it goes back to countryside and even a little bit combat, where it's like, no matter how sort of bad Owen gets, he always is at his best when he's thinking like a medical professional, when he's being a doctor. And so I like that it's something related to that that makes him realize, like, oh no, I've done goofed.
Yeah. But like I said, if we didn't have Owen, that wouldn't happen.
But also Tosh and Jack would have been stuck in the past. And
Yeah.
I know you just made the point of like they're two people for the sake of like history and whatever. It's
Mhm.
ultimately worth it to leave them there. But on at least some level, you have to be like they were going to be stuck there forever. There was no other way to get them back except for the way that we did it. Even in the context of this episode, things like get really out of control, and we'll get to that in a minute. Everyone eventually, let's lead into it with this. Everyone, Owen, Yanto, Tosh, and Gwen are seeing like visions of dead loved ones. Gwen sees a vision of Reese dead, and this Billis Manger guy has something to do with it. So she goes a little bit paranoid, brings him to Torchwood, decides to lock him in a cell to protect him. Doesn't explain things, even though, like, I get it, it's complicated. I would have had her try to explain something a little bit, whatever. Reese is there. He gets let out by Billis and then stabbed. At this point, everyone on the team, except for Jack, has someone that they've lost who is like showing up to them in the form of visions. Open the rift and you could get us back. Open the rift and you can solve all the problems. So everyone just mutinies against Jack. It's really, really intense. Like everyone is about to open the rift and Jack is just on his own, and it's I'm gonna get into that in a minute. But they open it, it brings out freaking Abaddon, the literal devil, or the cousin of the devil, or however you want to put it. So that's the whole problem. Jack ultimately fixes it, and we can talk about how he fixes it and all that. But my central point here being is that in the end, it works. Abaddon was gonna screw everything up if we didn't get lucky and have Jack, but in the end, opening the rift did end up being the fix to all of the problems.
Yeah, but I'm still trying to figure out how that even worked. Like, did this just bring everybody back to life? Just magically?
I'm talking about all of the misplaced in time people. That problem was getting worse and worse, and they keep talking about Owen's like, okay, Jack, you want to lead us. Tell us how to fix the problem. You're not giving us any solutions. Because Jack doesn't know what to do, and so they pick the worst option because it's the only option, and it's the option that actually ends up doing what they wanted it to do, minus the whole giant demon thing.
But on the side note, they all did for self-centered reasons, though, if you really think about it.
Definitely, yeah. Although, again, it was the only thing they could do. The alternative ending to this episode is they don't open the rift, they follow Jack's instructions, they don't do anything, and then more people just keep coming from out of time, and things get worse until, I don't know, the planet explodes or something.
Yeah, or Doctor shows up and fixes it.
That could also have worked.
That would be a good tie-in. I think they had some kind of weird thing about not wanting the Doctor on the show back then. I don't know why.
Well, I mean, this is the season finale. You wouldn't want the main character of a different show to come in and fix all the problems. That would just be not good.
Yeah, but I mean the whole show. I would like to see him at least in one episode. It would have been nice.
Yeah, but then you run into that problem of, was it Edward who brought this up? Of, if the Doctor shows up in a Torchwood episode, then you're gonna have, little kids who watch Doctor Who wanting to watch Torchwood to see him in it, and that would not be good.
Yeah, but it didn't stop him with class.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. But,
I wanted to point out, I love that little speech Jack kind of gives everybody, calling them out on their crap.
Yeah, okay, let's just talk about that whole conversation. That's, really intense. This whole series, I've mentioned this before, but it's kind of amazing that it makes me sympathize with Owen at all. Because you're right, he's the cause of so many problems, a whole lot of them. And yet, when Jack kicks him out and he's outside the elevator, he's about to break down, I feel bad for him because I feel like Owen in this moment is starting to realize, partially because of how he's lost Diane, I think he's starting to realize just how alone he is. He had the potential to have people he was close to with this team, and he didn't make the most of it, and now it's gone. And he makes a point of it's not just that I'm fired. Once I leave, Jack's gonna find me and retcon me, and I'm not even gonna remember any of you people. And he really doesn't want to let that go. Despite all of the terrible stuff that's happened to him and by him and around him, he values his time and his memories and his relationships here enough that he doesn't want to let that stuff go. And I don't think even he realizes that until Jack fires him.
I kind of read that scene a bit differently, because going to get all his memories erased until the time he started working there, that would be a big chunk of your life he would be missing. And I'd be scared, even if it was bad memories, he'd be losing the memories of Diane and everything else. I don't know if it's so much that he's upset that he's losing memories of Jack and Tosh and Glenn, it might be just Diane, and just having a big chunk of your life go missing. I don't know how long he's been working there, but I think it's what, like 5 to 10 years at least?
Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be one or the other. I think it's a mix or a gray area of both. Like, there is stuff that he's experienced that he wants to hold on to on some level, and he's like really genuinely scared to lose all of that. Because Owen's whole problem from the beginning of this show, like we've discussed this earlier, has been like not being able to be emotionally open. And in this episode, he's like the most open. Like, he's a bleeding wound of a person, and he's just like, he can't not confront his emotions anymore. He can't try and do what he did in combat, which bury everything under aggression or just acting like he doesn't care. Like, all the stuff is piled up and he's finally just broken down. We can talk about the rest of the ending, we can talk about whatever,
Mhm.
but at the very end, when all is said and done, and Jack is like alive and stuff, I just love that whole scene. Yanto goes in for the handshake, and Jack pulls him into an embrace and kisses him, and it's like, no, no more formalities. And Tasha runs up to him and hugs him. And it's like those two have gotten a bit closer. And he goes up to Owen, and you're not sure what's gonna happen. And Owen like doesn't know what to say, and Jack just says, "I forgive you." And Owen breaks down in tears. And it's just, I don't know, what that works on me for so many levels. I feel like that's a moment that we've been building to from episode 1. Owen is, he doesn't know how to say sorry, he doesn't know how to say I love you, he doesn't know how to accept forgiveness. He hasn't had that kind of connection with anyone. And Jack has spent the whole series deliberately avoiding connecting with any of the team. Like, he can't even participate in a game where they just sit around talking about like who they kissed without sort of being secretive and awkward about it. And now the two of them can just have a real genuine human moment where it's like, after all you've done, all this stuff, all these problems, all the hardship we've caused for each other, I forgive you. It's okay. And Owen doesn't know how to deal with that, so he just breaks down into tears. And I don't know, I really like that. I like that a lot.
Finally had an emotional breakdown. Side note, Countryside, that whole game you keep talking about, when I rewatched that, I didn't get that from it. I just felt like Jack was just making like a joke. Like, the game continued on before he could actually even get the opportunity to do anything. So
I don't know. I feel like that's the writer part of my brain saying, if that was the intent, then why not just have him answer it? Like, everyone's answers to that question
yeah,
reflects on their character in some way, and Jack is the only one who doesn't have one.
I guess you can look at it that way, but the only reason I think it's not that big a deal because in the season we're still trying to make him a kind of a mystery for the audience. So it makes sense that they wouldn't get too deep into him because, like in the fairy episode, they just give us tiny little bits and they don't give us the whole backstory yet. So I can understand him being more of a background character.
I would feel that way if it weren't for the fact that in this episode, in End of Days, none of the rest of the team know anything about Jack is basically a plot point, where it's like that is also partially why they turn on him, where Owen has that whole bit where it's like, who even are you anyway? Jack Harkness, like, we don't know what that means. No one here knows anything about you. Jack has this line where he's like, I don't feel like I have your full trust at the moment, or something. Well, how can anyone on this team fully trust Jack? He doesn't tell them anything. Even now, they're trying to save the world, and he won't give them anything to work with.
But all I was saying, I just don't think that one scene went that deep into it. That's all.
Yeah, but I feel like that whole bit and like a lot of this episode is, I don't know, like I've been reading stuff into this whole series, and I feel like part of why this episode works for me more than it does for a lot of people is like, yes, some plot points are stupid. Yes, Abaddon is really weird, and we'll get into him in just a minute, but I feel like thematically with like what we're saying with this team, this episode is kind of the perfect like climax for, okay, we finally maybe gotten past that. Part of that is this line, I forget who says it, but I just wrote this line here where it's like, this is what happens here, like in Torchwood, we all end up alone. That's it. That's what we've been building to this whole series. And like Billis shows up and he's preying on all of the team's loneliness and their need for connections to other people, because in Torchwood, that's what they all lose. And like since episode 1, we've just been pushing all of these characters to the point that they'd be willing to open the rift because they keep losing people. At the end of the day, it's Jack's fault because he's running the place like this.
Oh, I finally remember what I was going to mention. Owen did lie, though, why he opened the rift. I don't know why Alanto never says anything about that.
I don't know, because again, it's not a binary black and white thing. It's not technically a lie. He was hoping to get Diane back, but he was also hoping to get Jack and Tosh back. Like,
Yeah,
that is in part the reason he did it, so it's not untrue.
I don't know. I feel like he could care less what happened to Jack and Tosh, to be honest. It was just all about Diane.
I feel like maybe he wouldn't have pushed the button if it weren't for Diane and would have considered other options, but I don't think he would have just left Jack and Tosh there to rot. Like,
Mm,
they had no other way to do what they were trying to do, so.
yeah, no, but I just feel like Owen would have left them there if it wasn't that little extra push.
Yeah, I definitely do not feel that way.
But
Like, he would not just, like, oh, they're in the past, oh well, and then never do anything about it.
I do, mainly because, like I said, he doesn't know Jack all that well. And Tosh, he just seems like she's a punching bag to him. Like he knows she has feelings and stuff for him, but he doesn't actually care. So I could see him just dropping them there, and it's like, oh, there's somebody that I actually care about. Now I'll do it, and then I'll just use the scapegoat. Yeah, I was trying to save you guys.
Yeah, I don't know. This comes back down to like our fundamentally different like reads on Owen. Is he a good person or a bad person? Him like leaving them there, just not even bothering to try getting them back feels like a bad person move in a way that is not in character with him to me. I don't think. But like you seem to think of him as a worse person than I do. So
I would like to know. Like, I would like to talk to Russ P. Davis and just ask him, would Owen leave him behind? To know.
yeah, I don't know, just a lot of little lines of dialogue that I like here. When Jack is being kind of cold with Owen and Yanto and Tosh, Gwen again has to be the voice of sort of empathy and remind him, like, all of your staff have feelings, Jack. And Jack heeds that advice too late, and it eventually leads to him getting shot in the head.
Wasn't it Owen that shot him too?
Yes.
Of course. There you go.
Jack goads him into it. Jack, you are continuing to handle this situation in like the worst way possible.
I think he knows because he can't die.
Yeah, like Jack is clearly very frustrated and just like fed up in that scene, but it's also like if your goal is to get them to not push the button, you're doing a bad job. Billis plays a bigger role in this episode. I am partially still just unsure what he is. Like, we realize that this whole time his motivation has been making stuff happen so that they'll open the rift and eventually it'll be big enough for Abaddon to come out. So we know that he's like an acolyte of Abaddon, and that's been his whole deal. What is he? Is he a person? Is he actually like the guy, Billis Manger? Or is he just some sort of like ethereal being tied to Abaddon that worships Abaddon in some way? Was he like really alive in the 40s when Diane and Lisa and Tasha's mom show up? Okay, is that secretly him talking through those likenesses to like convince them to open the rift? Because that's my immediate assumption, but that's never confirmed. So like there's a lot of mystery surrounding this guy and like what even is he?
Yeah, they're kind of vague on that. Even that part, I'm like, is that him talking through them? Or is that the demon trying to get people to open the portal?
Is it just that the demon is able to like use any dead person, speak to people and stuff like that? A lot of different things, and I'm just part of me doesn't necessarily need those answers, but another part of me is like feels a little bit contrived if the guy who's pretty much behind all of this Billis guy, he isn't actually meant to be anything except a literal plot device where it's like, okay, I guess, but then that's just kind of whatever. This is a story about the Torchwood team as characters. We spend most of the runtime just focusing on the implications of the characters and the relationships and stuff like that. It's not really about all of the demon stuff, fine, but it still just feels kind of lazy.
Yeah, that's where the episode kind of falls apart for me is when it comes to the demon stuff, like a plot in the background that someone didn't really think all the details through. He said something like he worships the demon, if I remember right. Like he was happy the demon finally came out. If the demon is just controlling him like he was dealing with like Tasha's mom and Lantro's girlfriend and stuff like that, then why would he have like this almost outside personality beyond that?
Why I'm assuming that it was Billis talking through them and not the demon itself, especially since we don't have much indication that the demon is intelligent. Let's talk about the demon himself, the big man, Abaddon. and how he ruins this episode for a lot of people. Now, personally, I think this whole thing is a mixed bag. Where on the one hand, when he shows up, really effective, like holy crap moment. I think like seeing this giant thing come out of like the rift and like descend over the city is actually a nice moment of genuine dread. Like I feel like the team does in that moment where it's like, oh no. And then the problem is just like the VFX there have not aged well at all, but whatever. I can suspend my disbelief enough to not be that bothered by it. It looks all right in some shots. The problem is just that, like, I think we resolve it too quickly.
Yeah.
Like, the sense of dread that comes with seeing that thing for the first time and being like, how the heck do we fix this? And then we almost immediately fix it, that kind of undercuts the whole thing. And like I get it, this is already a long episode. I wouldn't necessarily cut time away from other parts, so something had to be truncated, and I guess this was it. And also, with how big this thing is, we can't have it running around the city for an extended period of time or everyone's dead, because it really is just that big. It descends upon like city blocks in a couple of seconds. They had to get rid of it as quickly as possible or there would be no more Cardiff. I get that.
I don't know. When I saw that thing, my first reaction was just, what the hell is that? I don't know. It was just like one of those moments where I just stood there and just stared at it in confusion. Like, that's the reveal? It's a Doom monster?
You could say that it feels out of place for this show. Again, where it's something like, it's kind of like Random Shoes in that it's maybe not bad on its own, but as part of Torchwood, it's maybe a bit strange. This has up to now been a very, like, grounded, but like science fiction procedural show, and our final boss is a literal giant horned demon that might feel more at home in like a fantasy thing. And so that's maybe a little bit of where part of the issue comes from, is just that this thing does not look like what you would imagine the final bad guy in a series of Torchwood to be. And so that's kind of where there's a little bit of dissonance also, aside from just the effects not having aged great.
It feels like, okay, we're at the end of the video game now.
And like not even necessarily a video game of this genre, but whatever.
Yes.
My real problem is like the way that like we ultimately handle it. Fine, it makes sense that he feeds on life. Jack has an infinite amount of life. He would just gorge on it until he like chokes and dies. Logistically, fine, whatever, nothing wrong with that. I have not agreed with you for most of these talks about John Barrowman's acting.
I think he's bad across the series. I just think when he's doing certain types of acting is when it becomes poor. Like, I liked him in the last episode we talked about. I thought he was actually pretty good in that. But I think he's at his best when he's more happy and fun.
I've never minded him doing like the angry or the somber stuff, but him like screaming in agony while Abaddon is above him, like feasting on him, like that's too much. Like that's, now we're getting into like William Shatner territory.
That whole part I just didn't like. Like, okay, how are we going to take down this big, huge demon down? I'm going to stand in front of him. It's going to work. Okay.
Logistically, it's fine. The issue is just that it feels anticlimactic.
Yeah. Very anticlimactic, and it's just kind of funny watching.
Yeah, the problem isn't that it doesn't make sense. The problem is just that we built a whole series like getting our characters to a place where they will bring in this literal demon into the world because they couldn't fight their own demons well enough. And it's a giant, giant thing that kills people just by standing over them. The scene in which we get rid of it is just going to be it standing over one of our characters. It makes sense, but it's just so like not climactic. It's such a non-dynamic scene.
It's very lame. I'm just gonna say that. It's basically like watching Jack. He's got like a leg cramp standing there, and and that's what kills the big bad demon. And that's what kind of kills it for most people.
I don't know. I really, really liked most of this stuff. And like I like that we spend like a solid couple of minutes on Jack being like dead, and it takes him a while to come back. And again, like the whole last few minutes of the episode are basically the team's whole dynamic in microcosm. Everyone basically gives up on him except for Gwen. I really like that. All this stuff has happened. Gwen has, like the rest of them, turned on Jack. She's been fed up with Jack. She's disagreed with him. They've had their issues. And yet, in the end, she is the one who stands by him and believes in him. And that is what it takes to bring him back. I don't know, just him coming back in the way that he greets everyone and forgiving Owen. I feel like we've decided series one is going to be about all of these issues that these people have, and they're going to be kind of unlikable, and it's going to be really hard to sort of see them all as good people sometimes, and yet at the end, we are going to have gotten them to a place where they've all grown and learned and become better people. And going into series two, it's not going to be like that anymore. And I feel like that's how this episode ends, and it felt really satisfying to me, honestly.
I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, got the very, very last scene, which will lead into our next discussion, which will be finally getting back into Doctor Who with Utopia. I've seen like people say that like in the very last shot of the episode, as we like pan out from the base and like from Cardiff, you can maybe see Jack running to the TARDIS in that shot. Looking at it closely, I don't think that's what that is, but if that's what it was intended to be, then that would be a nice little cute thing. The impression you get, just because of how the TARDIS works, is that the TARDIS is materializing in the base, and Jack runs in, and then they're gone, and that's when Gwen, Yanto, and Tosh show up. On one level, I feel like great ending to set up into Utopia, nice cliffhanger to end the season on. But this is a Doctor Who spinoff. Most of the people watching this show recognize it as a Doctor Who spinoff. I'm just being pedantic. But again, part of me is like, Torchwood is its own show. And if you end season one on a cliffhanger that is not going to be resolved at the beginning of season two, then that's maybe kind of cheating. Been watching Torchwood series 1 episodes 1 to 13? Well, you want the answer to what happened at the end of this story? Go watch a different show.
To be fair, we're kind of used to doing that now because we have so much crossover stuff everywhere. So
yeah, but it's usually not the end of seasons. Like the big comparison point I would think of would be like something like the Arrowverse, where they do their yearly crossover, where it's one episode of Arrow leading directly into one episode of The Flash, leading directly into one episode of Supergirl, leading directly into one episode of Legends of Tomorrow. One story told across 4 episodes, stacking on top of each other, like across the week. And it's usually in the middle of a season. We'll like stop the central plot of those 4 shows, put that on pause, do the crossover story, resolve it in 4 episodes, and then get back to whatever the plot of those individual shows were. And sometimes characters will die or like status quo shifts will happen. Well, if you didn't catch the crossover, then really that's your own fault. I feel like ending a season of your show, we're not actually going to resolve the end of the season in the show. It's going to be in a different show, and the next season will begin. It'll just be like, whatever, you missed the resolution, too bad. It's like something about it being the end of a season feels strange to me.
yeah, I can see where you're getting there from. I think the reason they probably did it was probably just, to get more people to watch Doctor Who.
It's smart. Again, it's my writer brain, like nitpicking and being like, you gotta be wary of your audience.
Yeah, but like I said, I think all they were caring about is trying to get many people to cross over as possible. It's like, let's get those viewers on this side and that side, and
Yeah. We'll get into Torchwood Series 1 as like a total package. I feel like most people can probably tell how both of us are going to come down on it. But, for the sake of it, I liked End of Days. I think it's a really good episode. It's got its issues, but I really liked it. And I'm really glad that we decided to do Torchwood. I've enjoyed sitting down with most of these episodes. Even the ones that aren't great haven't made me like regret deciding to talk about this show,
like Class.
Like Class, yes.
Or you look like you want death to come. Or you want Abaddon to come and take you away. probably know my thoughts are mostly kind of tedious to watch with a few exceptions. That's all I got to say about it.
Fair enough.